In today's video, I am going to be running a live AI cold calling campaign. This time we have real data sets with leads we've collected over the past few months to answer that burning question. Does AI cold calling really work? Normally, a solid qualification rate for these calls are between 13 and 25%, depending on the status of the lead. With what we've seen so far from our AI agents that have been deployed, we're feeling confident that we'll hit that 13% quite easily, if not higher. These percentages do really rely on the calls actually being answered, and this can change depending on the time of the day. To combat this, we'll run a split test on different times of the day, with the first round being early afternoon, the second round being late afternoon, and then the third and final round being the following day in the morning. This way we can test different calling times to determine which time is the best when launching AI cold calls and to showcase you the results we get from that. Let's dive in. First and foremost, we do need a VP assistant to initiate these calls, and the setup here is quite simple. We'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll run through a series of qualifying questions that will highlight to us after analysis whether that lead is interested in our services or not. As such, we have a prompt here. You are an outbound sales agent tasked with contacting warm leads interested in Talk AI's services. The reason I say warm here is, although they are quite cold, we've sent them a previous email just to make them aware of Talk AI. Now, Talk AI is another agency of mine that specializes just in these phone callers. Check us out in the description. I'll leave a link there to our LinkedIn page and you can check that out. Moving forward, you should seek to understand their needs throughout the natural course of the conversation. You should approach the conversation in a warm and welcoming way, ensuring the user feels heard and understood. We specify the questions we want answered here, and then we'll give an example question line here. Keep your responses concise and short. Do not deviate outside the domain of our scope. We're using Anthropic and Claude 3.5 sonnets because I feel like this model is much better at handling conversational tasks. The voice we'll be using is a cloned voice of myself, and we're setting the stability to 0.4 and clarity similarity to 0.7. I find these settings are the best to make sure the voice sounds extremely realistic. Now, this is a professional clone I had done on 11 Labs. Check out the video of that if you haven't seen already. But other than that, there's not much more functionality we have in the back end here, only so far as our make scenarios. The first scenario here, it may look familiar. I did make a video on this. This is a batch scenario setup where we'll search our lead list, which is stored in a Google Drive, iterate through the data points, which will be the name, number, email, aggregate all those fields into a bundle that we can then send out to our VP post request, which will initiate these calls. We'll update the status column to called and store any incomplete executions. Now, it's important to note this will only run 10 calls if you don't have an enterprise account. To combat this, we can just limit the responses to 10. Now, I don't have to worry about that. We'll run through the whole campaign as a batch campaign. The second scenario is the post-call analysis. Now, after running these calls, this could probably be set up a little bit better, but that's the whole reason why we do these campaigns, to get some valuable data and make adjustments where needed. To explain it, we have a webhook that's receiving our end of call report. We'll match that report with the corresponding contact in our lead list, and we'll run it through a specialized AI assistant. We'll pass that response and update the row. So here we are in OpenAI's platform. We have our outbound assistant, which is an expert text analyzer. Its job is to extract some key metrics from a given phone call transcript that we can then use to analyze and segregate into some different metrics. Next, we want to determine the response format to be native in make.com so that we can then pass each field into the corresponding cells. To do that, I've used a JSON schema. The schema name is phone conversation metrics. The first type is for our outcome. The second is our sentiment. The third, the engagement. And then the fourth is keywords. And what this will do is return each metric field, so outcome, sentiment, engagement, and keywords, as separate arrays that we can then use in our make scenario to update the columns. Now that I've explained all the tools we'll be using, let's dive into this outbound campaign and jump into the results. We're about to launch our batch campaign here at 2:15 p.m. but we have about 120 leads here. We have some fields here that we'll be collecting from these conversations. Now, we don't expect all of these people to pick up. We'll leave voice messages and we'll recall them if they hadn't picked up. But essentially what we want to collect here is obviously the date and time of these calls, the outcome of the call. So this will either be a qualified, unqualified, or potential outcome based on a few qualification criteria we have set up within our assistant. Next, we'll collect the conversation sentiment. Now, this can be derived from the length of user responses, as well as some key terminology and phrases throughout the conversation. Next, we'll categorize conversations to engagement levels. Next, we'll record some keywords, and this will be really important when we do run through all these 120 leads. We'll get some data on what's said the most based on our question lining, which can give us some insight into where we need to improve with our outbound callers and what we're doing right. So this is going to be particularly handy at a later date when we start improving some outbound qualification callers based on the data we get today. And then finally, we're going to record the transcript also. This will be handy again to collect some data and analyze it at a later date. It's almost go time until we launch this campaign, and you'll start to see in a few minutes all these numbers will turn to called as we're now initiating these outbound calls. Okay, so it is go time, and we'll initiate this campaign. These are all the leads coming through now. Pretty quick call time in between each lead. The conditions are changing after each one is called. So all the data's been cleaned up. The numbers tell us in the end for that first run, 17% qualified, 37% as potential leads, and 46% as unqualified. We captured a lot of valuable transcripts here, which will be used to refine our model and create a stronger outbound caller that we'll use to run through a second run. Time to run through the third and final round, about 10:30 in the morning. And I've marked those we haven't called or reached voicemail with not called. So we'll run through this scenario for the third and final time, and then I'll be with you with the analytics and overall results of each run. So we have finished the third and final run. All in all, pretty successful. Qualification rate, at least on this preliminary data, was around that 13%. We thought it would be higher, but some time periods that we called in weren't optimal. But as you can see, we got some serious data here, plenty of transcripts to further refine our assistants and to flesh out this data a bit more, see where the assistant went wrong, and then update the assistant as needed. I'll jump over into the data points and the analytics of calls, and we'll analyze from there. So let's get into the analytics here. For run number one, launched at 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon, we had a total of 116 dials. We reached about 59 voicemails off the bat with 47 answered calls. Of those 47 calls, we had a 17% qualification rate, 46.8% potential, and 36.2% unqualified. Pretty good off the bat for run number one at 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon. For run number two, we had less dials at 59, with 26 reaching voicemail and with 25 answered calls. We suspect here, given the decrease in call volume, we'll see a decrease in percentages here, but we'll go find out. So for this one, we had an 8% qualification rate of those calls answered and a 36% potential, and with a higher 56% unqualified. Jumping into run number three, this was at 10:30 a.m. in the morning, with the previous one being at 4:30 in the afternoon. We had 33 dials, so again, less than run number two. 27 reached voicemail, so a large amount of those dials just went straight to voicemail, so we really don't have too much data here to go off, but we had 6 answered, and unfortunately with all 6, they were unqualified. Either they hung up or they weren't interested. We had a total of 200 plus calls or dials with about 78 answered calls. So we had total a 12.8% qualification rate. So just tipping on that minimum 13% line, with 39.7% as potential leads and a further 47.4% as unqualified leads. But based off the totals here and the time it took to make those 200 dials, which was about in total around 20 minutes, the efficiency is unparalleled. We're seeing with AI cold callers a minimum threshold percentage of qualification rate, which is extremely good considering this is an AI calling and the amount of dials it's doing. So my final thoughts. We had 10 qualified leads from that campaign with a total call time by the agent at 23 minutes. That efficiency is unparalleled. When making a comparison to a human, it's about 7 times the efficiency. Now, I understand that at this point in time, the quality may be slightly less than that of a human caller. However, what we're seeing as a trend is human callers are decreasing in quality and AI callers are increasing in quality. I can infer this due to the recent advancement in AI voice technology, particularly from OpenAI and their advanced voice mode, which we'll have access to very shortly. On the other hand, human callers are decreasing in quality, as mentioned. The reason is because a lot of businesses are cutting costs and outsourcing the sales labor to overseas call centers. This is largely because businesses want to reduce costs, especially in Australia. The market as a whole is quite volatile at the moment, and I don't know if you've received cold calls by these call centers, but more often than not, these calls are low quality and they're getting worse and worse. Now, this may be a bias on my behalf, but you make your own decision. And from this data, I at least think that it's some solid results. On top of that, we now have some good data to further refine these agents and make tweaks as need be. But that's all for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. This was an interesting video to make, and I wanted to make a video of a real live campaign using the technology I'm purporting on my channel, so that at least you know I'm using it and we're seeing some successful results from it. Make sure to leave a comment on this video of your thoughts on AI cold calling. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay ahead of the AI curve. And if you're a business owner looking to implement some of this technology in your business, be sure to check out the link below and you can get in touch with myself. But that's all for today. Until next week.